The Prime Minister says the COP climate agreement is game-changing and signals the end for coal power. But there's disappointment and anger that India and China watered down the final wording about its use.
We can lobby, we can cajole, we can encourage, but we cannot force sovereign nations to do what they do not wish to do.
We'll be live in the world's biggest polluters, the US and China. Also tonight, a man has died after a car exploded outside a hospital in Liverpool. 3 men have been arrested under the Terrorism Act. The Queen misses the Remembrance Sunday ceremony at the Cenotaph for the first time in 22 years.
Hamilton, against the odds, has come home to win the South.
And victory for Lewis Hamilton at the Brazilian Grand Prix keeps him in with a chance of the Formula One Championship. Hello, good evening. Boris Johnson has described a global accord to speed up action against climate change as historic and game-changing and the beginning of the end for coal power. But his remarks come after the president of the COP26 climate conference, Alok Sharma, said India and China will have to justify themselves to the world's most vulnerable countries after the two nations demanded last-minute changes to the deal, softening commitments to reduce the use of coal. An agreement was finally reached last night. It says limiting average global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by the year 2100 is still attainable. Scientists have said that that amount by then would avoid the worst impacts of climate change. But there's controversy over the pledge about coal, which now says its use should be phased down rather than phased out. The deal pledges more money for poorer countries to help them adapt, and nations will have to republish their climate plans next year to keep what's been agreed on track. The conference also agreed to reductions in methane emissions and to curb deforestation across the planet. All the details from our science editor, David Shookman.
It was billed as a landmark moment in our relations with the planet. But did the Glasgow conference do anything to limit the rise in temperatures? The man at the centre of the talks, Alok Sharma, had to shuttle between delegations. China and India not allowing coal to be phased out, only to be phased down. The pressure really showed at one point. And the final wording on coal has left disappointment. But this evening in Downing Street, Mr. Sharma admitted how the deal was very nearly lost.
For months, people have been asking me, some few good people have been asking me, do you feel the weight of the world on your shoulders? And I can tell you there was one really tense hour where I did feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. And, you know, so many people have done so much over 2 years, the UK team internationally, and, you know, this deal was absolutely in jeopardy.
His efforts at the conference were praised by opposition parties, but they also warned there's a long way to go.
We have made some progress and we have to acknowledge that, but we also have to acknowledge that we failed in getting that target of 1.5, and we must keep that pressure on because it will be catastrophic for areas of the world and for our planet, so we've got more to do.
So what happens now? Well, by the end of next year, countries should update their climate pledges, a faster pace than before, and they are now expected to do this more often. By 2024, a package of long-term financial aid for the poorest nations should be agreed. And then by 2030, to avoid the worst of global warming, carbon emissions should be halved. But we're still a long way from achieving that. So as things stand, the polar ice will melt faster than ever, raising sea levels and together with heavier rain, threatening millions of people with flooding. The implications of failing to act soon have never been clearer. We've already warmed by 1.1 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial times, and the hope is that 1.5 will be the limit of the rise. But we're heading for at least 1.8, and that's only if every promise is kept. More realistically, we're on course for about 2.4, a really dangerous level.
The difference between 1.5 and 2.4 is really survival of millions and millions of people and species in the planet. This is what is particularly true for the islands.
But according to Camilla Bourne, a government advisor at the heart of the talks, the worst outcomes can be averted.
We have kept 1.5 alive, but on the basis of delivering on those commitments, and that will be our next task for us as the presidency, but for all the countries, and it's on us to make sure that this is real in action.
The key to that is what's happening far beyond the conference. The spectacular fall in the price of renewable forms of energy. They now make good business sense, whatever gets agreed in talks about climate change. The arguments here over the last fortnight were about words on a page, and in the end they may or may not prove important. What matters more is the signal sent by this gathering and others to come to businesses, investors, banks, all of us, that with the right pace and scale of change, it should still be possible to get the world onto a safer course. David Schuckman, BBC News in Glasgow.
Well, as we've heard, India and China have faced heavy criticism after demanding those last-minute changes to the deal on the issue of coal. India relies heavily on coal for its economic development. Our South Asia correspondent Rajini Vaidyanathan reports on the challenges the country faces in tackling climate change.
India's sacred Yamuna River, a symbol of purity, turned toxic. What looks like harmless bubbles is poisonous foam, much of it caused by industrial waste and sewage. Shakil's a fisherman who lives and works here. All the chemicals are thrown in the river, he tells me. It's disgusting, but it's not a natural disaster. It's humans who've done this.
What we're seeing here, in many ways, represents India's overall challenges when it comes to climate change. One of the country's holiest rivers, now horribly polluted. The cause? Waste from nearby factories. Factories which create jobs and help drive economic growth.
Coal was centre stage at the COP summit, in a similar tussle over the country's economic and environmental needs. Dirty but dependable, it powers this nation, providing some 70% of India's energy and millions of jobs, which is why the country refused to agree to a deal to phase it out completely. Prime Minister Narendra Modi did make a bold pledge to hit net zero emissions by 2070 and asked the West for more investment to fund renewable projects. The aim is to move quickly towards alternative sources like solar, with a goal of generating 50% of power that way by the next decade. Vaibhav Chaturvedi's just returned from the COP summit, where he was advising India's government.
Coal will grow, but solar will grow much faster. So essentially, it's not that only one technology grows and the other does not. Both will have to grow together for meeting the energy demand for this fast-growing economy.
The average Indian consumes far less power than the average Brit or American. Many here say they don't want to be told what to do by Western nations who have a long way to go to phase out fossil fuels themselves. Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Delhi.
Well, the world's two biggest emitters of greenhouse gases are China and the United States. In a moment, we'll hear from our North America editor John Sopel at the White House. First, though, let's go to our China correspondent, Stephen McDonnell. He's in Beijing. Is it fair to say, Steve, that China's really sending out a message here, saying it needs longer to reduce its use of coal?
Well, China's decades of breakneck economic growth have at times been catastrophic for the natural environment. They've also lifted millions of people out of poverty. This dramatic change in people's living standards has been fueled by and large by coal-fired power. Now, in recent times, China has built huge wind and solar farms, but officials are still not sure when they can phase out coal, so they're wary of making pledges to do so. That said, we shouldn't be too pessimistic because the Communist Party here is already using its media to tell its people that coal is an especially big part of the problem. Beijing has also said that the world's richest countries have benefited the most from coal-fired power, so they need to give the developing world more time to catch up.
Well, it's clear that the Biden administration wanted to play a leading role in the talks in Glasgow, and to some extent they've achieved that. Remember, Donald Trump pulled the United States from the Paris climate change agreement. Joe Biden said we must lead, and arguably you wouldn't have had the methane reduction deal that was agreed with the EU were it not for American leadership. And one of the surprises of the talks was the agreement between the US and China to talk about how they could make further progress on this. But Joe Biden can't act unilaterally. He's got political constraints as well. And he's got a Senate which just will not pass measures like, for example, totally eliminating subsidies on fossil fuels. So has Joe Biden gone as far as climate activists wanted? Probably not. But has he gone as far as he could do, given the political strengths of the congressional arithmetic? Well, probably he has.
All right. Thanks both, John Sopel and Stephen McDonnell. 3 men have been arrested under the Terrorism Act after a taxi exploded outside the Liverpool Women's Hospital this morning. The passenger in the vehicle was killed. The driver was injured. Our correspondent Fiona Trott is in Liverpool tonight. Fiona.
This is a very fast-moving investigation. Already today, the police have searched properties in 2 separate streets a couple of miles away from here. And that police activity continues in the city tonight. The men arrested are 29, 26 and 21 years old. They were detained in the Kensington area. The man who died in this explosion is yet to be formally identified by the police. But while this investigation continues, people here have been left wondering how and why this explosion occurred outside Liverpool Women's Hospital. The report contains flashing images. Just seconds before 11 a.m, the car explosion which killed a man inside. Terrifying for onlookers and so dangerously close to the hospital itself. A police cordon was immediately set up. Local roads were also closed. Then confirmation that a counter-terrorism investigation had been launched.
Unfortunately, I can confirm that 1 person has died and another has been taken to hospital where he is being treated for his injuries, which thankfully are not life-threatening. So far, we understand that the car involved was a taxi which pulled up at the hospital shortly before the explosion occurred.
And while the cordon remains in place, patients have been told to stay away.
We're reviewing our patient activity for the next 24 to 48 hours, and patients should wait to be contacted for updates about any planned appointments.
This has been a fast-moving investigation. Just hours after the news conference, it emerged the police were at this residential street in the Kensington area. And also here, just 1 mile from the Liverpool Women's Hospital. Counter-terrorism detectives say they're keeping an open mind about the cause of the explosion. Tonight, people are being told to remain calm but vigilant. As you heard in that report there, the police believe that the car involved in this explosion was a taxi. The driver was injured. He's in a stable condition in hospital, and already a fundraising page has been set up on social media for him. Jane.
Fiona Trott, thank you. The Queen has missed the annual Remembrance Sunday service at the Cenotaph in London for the first time in 22 years after spraining her back. The Prince of Wales laid a wreath on the Queen's behalf at one of the many events around the UK to honour those fallen in conflict. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
It was the customary cenotaph commemoration after the limitations last year caused by the pandemic. There was, though, one notable absentee. The Queen did not, as had been expected, take her place on a balcony overlooking the cenotaph. According to Buckingham Palace, she had sprained her back. She continues to rest at Windsor. The Prince of Wales led other senior members of the royal family to their places at the cenotaph in readiness for the 2-minute silence observed in Whitehall and at ceremonies around the country. After the 2-minute silence and the sounding of the last post in Whitehall by Royal Marine buglers, the Prince of Wales placed the Queen's wreath of red poppies against the Cenotaph northern face, in tribute to those from Britain and the Commonwealth who lost their lives in the world wars and more recent conflicts. Then, after the official wreath-laying, it was the return of the Veterans' March Past. The former servicemen and women denied the chance to be at the Cenotaph last year, paying their own tributes to former colleagues. The head of state had been absent, a matter of great regret, we're told, to her and to those who were on parade. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
The government's latest coronavirus figures for the UK show there were more than 36,500 new infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, which means on average there were 37,488 new cases reported per day in the last week. 63 deaths were recorded. That's someone who dies within 28 days of a positive COVID test. On average, in the last week, 156 related deaths were recorded every day. And 12.6 million people have received their COVID-19 booster jab. Boris Johnson has admitted that his handling of the row about Owen Paterson and standards could have been better. The issue returns to the Commons tomorrow, with a growing number of MPs facing criticism of their conduct. Damien Grammaticus is with me. What more's the Prime Minister been saying, Damien?
Well, Jane, this issue has caused, for the past 10 days, real questions about Boris Johnson's decision-making, the government's actions, questions about whether they may have tried to undermine or may have acted in a way that could have undermined the standard system. Mr Johnson today, asked about it 3 times in his press conference, said, "Of course, I think things could certainly have been handled better, let me put it that way, by me." Now, remember, Owen Paterson, Conservative MP, found by the Independent Standards Commissioner to have acted egregiously, taken money and lobbied. Boris Johnson stepped in 10 days ago, ordered Conservative MPs to vote to block any suspension for the time being and try to rewrite the rules. There was a furious row with the opposition. The government backed down. And now, where we are left is Mr Paterson, of course, resigned. His case comes back to the Commons tomorrow, which may well approve that report. Mr Johnson, importantly today, did also say that he now backs that independent commissioner. He says he has confidence in her. She should be allowed to do her job, which, of course, means investigating other MPs as she is and any MP she chooses in the future, which could be including, of course, if she chooses the Prime Minister.
All right. Thank you, Damien Grammaticus, our political correspondent. Poland's border guard has accused neighbouring Belarus of helping a large group of migrants to make an attempt to cross into its territory by force. Thousands of people are at a makeshift camp on Belarus's border with Poland, enduring freezing conditions in the hope of crossing into the EU. Our correspondent Jenny Hill has been to the Polish side of the border, near the town of Hanovka. Her reports contain some images you may find distressing from the start.
In the freezing darkness of a Polish forest, the human cost of the political deadlock. This woman is severely hypothermic and, we're told, pregnant. She'd made it across the border from Belarus. Volunteers, then border guards, found her here with her husband and 5 children. They're in police custody, she's in hospital, and 2 other men who were with them were reportedly pushed back into Belarus.
There were 5 kids among them.
Piotr, who was there and gave us the footage, is from an informal network of people who try to help those who make it across the border.
Whether you are pro-refugees or against them, I think we all deeply agree that people need some basic humanitarian help.
At the border, desperation. People trapped in the cold of a makeshift camp on the Belarusian side. Poland refuses to let them in, and today accused Belarus, backed by Russia, of preparing the people here to storm the EU border en masse. Some people have made it across the border. They're hiding in the forests along its length. Behind them, a hostile Belarusian border force. Ahead of them, a Europe where they're not really wanted. And the Polish government would prefer you not to know about them. Journalists and aid agencies are banned from getting too close to the border. But Misha lives inside the exclusion zone and helps the people he sees.
Recently I met a group of 25 people from Iraq and before 15 from Syria, some guys from Somalia, some people from Turkey, so probably around 100 or something.
We went back to the woods where the young family was found. The geopolitical standoff continues, Belarus and Russia against Poland in the west. These scattered possessions, a reminder of those caught in the middle. Jenny Hill, BBC News, Poland.
Now we will turn to all the day's sports news. That comes from Ollie Foster. Evening, Ollie.
Many thanks, Jane. Lewis Hamilton described it as the hardest weekend of his career, but he still took the checkered flag in Sao Paulo to keep himself in the Formula One title race. Max Verstappen's lead at the top of the standings is now down to 14 points, with just 3 races left to go. Here's our sports correspondent, Andy Swiss.
He is no stranger to the extraordinary, but even by Lewis Hamilton standards, this was a win which almost defied belief.
Lights out, away we go.
It had seemed mission impossible. While his title rival Max Verstappen charged into an early lead, Hamilton began way down in 10th after being penalised in qualifying. But soon he was blazing through the field in a flash up to second with Verstappen in his sights. Could he get past him? He tried once and the result was so nearly a collision, both cars briefly off the track. With 12 laps left, another chance for Hamilton, and this time there was no stopping him.
The crowd go absolutely wild.
From 10th to triumph, against all the odds, somehow he'd done it.
What a victory for Lewis Hamilton.
Yes! Come on, guys! And it's a win which revives Hamilton's title hopes. He still trails Verstappen, but as he proved here, well, anything is possible. Andy Swiss, BBC News.
Australia have won the men's T20 World Cup. They beat New Zealand by 8 wickets in the Dubai final. They were chasing 173 for victory, and after brilliant knocks from David Warner and Mitch Marsh, Glenn Maxwell hit the winning runs with an over to spare as they lifted the trophy for the first time. Wales have their first win in the Rugby Union Autumn Series, 38-23, the slightly flattering scoreline against Fiji in Cardiff. The visitors had a man sent off in the first half, and Wales finally made that count after the break. Lewis Rees-Zammit with the best of Wales' 6 tries. England's women are unbeaten in their autumn internationals. They ran in 7 tries against Canada to win 51-12 at the Stoop. Wing Heather Cowell went over twice on her debut. That's now 17 Test wins in a row for the Red Roses. They'll match England men's record if they beat the USA next weekend. Elsewhere, Scotland's women beat Japan. It's very tight at the top of the Women's Super League. Chelsea now just a point behind Arsenal. That's after thrashing Manchester City 4-0 away. The reigning champions took the lead after a minute and never looked back. Frank Kirby with the pick of their goals. They've now won 6 in a row. Well, you can find all the WSL scores on the BBC website, and also on there, tributes to a Celtic legend, Bertie Auld, who's died at the age of 83. That's all the sport for now. Jane.
Thank you very much, Ollie Foster. And that is it from the team here tonight. On BBC One, it's time for the news now, wherever you are. Good night.